Well, we finally got you here to the podcast, Beyond Human Condition. So happy, man. So happy that after 10 years, pretty much we know each other.
About a decade now.
Yeah. You are the guy that I wanted to have here in the studio to deepen into some of that knowledge and career that you have gone through as a retired colonel of the U.S. Army. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. Retired. I was a 06, which is a full bird colonel, and started in my military career as a buck private. I was an enlisted guy. So was a combat engineer originally, which is a sapper. So that would be the guy that did demolitions, blew up bridges, built bridges, made appeties and tank traps, and did all of the battlefield engineering kind of skills. Did that from private to sergeant, then was discharged honorably after 4 years, and went to undergraduate and graduate school, and eventually went on for my medical training, and then went back in the military as a second lieutenant and medical specialist corps officer, and then eventually went to Fort Rucker, Alabama, trained as a flight surgeon. And most of my career in the military was as a flight surgeon doing trauma medevac and or aviation, working with pilots and keeping them healthy and safe, and those sorts of things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Dane Harden.
There you go.
Yeah.
I served in total 35 years.
35 years. And in the middle of all of this, you also managed to train martial arts.
I did, yeah. I spent time both active duty and then also in the National Guard. So sort of flip-flopped between those two worlds. And when I was in the National Guard, I also worked at the Veterans Administration as a primary care provider. So sort of allowed me to live 2 or 3 lives, really.
I will say so. And this one right here?
That is, I think, from Romania. That was my last deployment overseas. I served overseas multiple times. I served in a place called Tallinn, Estonia with NATO, Republic of Georgia with NATO, and then I served in Bosnia twice. I was in Kosovo during the Balkans War. Did 3 tours in Iraq. I served in Afghanistan. And then on top of all of that, that was a lot of active duty time. Just a whole lot of different kind of experiences. And through all of that, I always trained in martial arts, whether in a dojo or on my own. I would often move bunks out of the way and just stretch out and practice my karate and Aikido and do my moves.
Because I do have a bunch of questions for you, so let me just organize how we're going to do this. But let's begin with the martial arts. How did you get into the martial arts?
It would have been 1969, and I was from a small town in western Maryland, Frostburg. And so I was the youngest of 5, and of course 4 older brothers. So I was getting picked on just a little bit, and an older sister. And I was a smaller, kind of a runty guy. And so for like similar reasons that a lot of people get into martial arts initially, and that's a big I, initially, it was just to learn how to defend myself and maybe become a little bit more physically fit. And I took to it like a fish took to water. And there was something to me that there was a connection in that martial arts training that I found so fulfilling that now, 56, 57 years later, I still train 5-6 days a week and still teach seminars all over the world. And it's just who I am.
And as far as like the styles of martial arts that you have trained?
Taekwondo was my initial style that I trained in, and Aikido. Those were the 2 first styles. The Aikido was first, and that was at a place called Allegheny Gym. It was a Aikido program run by a guy named John Willett, and it was just a community program that was free because where I grew up, it was kind of the heart of Appalachia, so there were a lot of poor kids. So this program was late 60s, and it was a way of introducing kids to something that would be sort of a different athletic endeavor. And so John taught classical Aikido. John's brother was a guy named Rick Willits, and Rick was a black belt from the Junri Institutes. And I saw him do a Taekwondo demonstration that would have been about 1970. And I started training in Taekwondo at the Junri Institutes. And earned my black belt from Grandmaster Junri. Junri would have been the founder or the father of Taekwondo in the United States. And now I hold an 8th Dan in that system. And my Aikido training is in Yoshinkan Aikido, which is a pre-World War II version of Aikido. Mm-hmm. So in the Aikido world, the joke is we're the knuckle draggers of the Aikido world because we are probably more directly akin to like the Daito-Ryu Aiki Jiu-Jitsu. We do flow at the higher levels just like Aikikai would, and our movements flow. But the guy Gozo Shioda, who founded Yoshinkan Aikido, also taught what was called the Senshusei course, which is a course for the police in Tokyo. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so they taught the Japanese riot police in Tokyo, and they used specifically one of the things that they learned.
And as far as like the evolution of the Yoshinkan system, do you consider that as some other styles that might have had some changes over time? Is the Yoshinkan kind of like stayed very traditional in the sense that hasn't changed much, or it really has opened up to new ideas in their training?
Well, yeah, I think they have. I mean, it's certainly a fluid martial art. Like any martial art always has influences and changes. I kickboxed with Joe Louis, and so when you train in Aikido from me, you're going to get some Taekwondo influence. You're going to get some kickboxing influence. You're going to get some of the Yoshinkan influence. But as far as Yoshinkan itself, Gozo Shioda was originally the founder. So Yoshinkan just meant like the house of the cultivated spirit, or a home where you go to cultivate your spirit through physical effort and through hard training, which is something he believed in. But Yoshinkan itself, I think, has tried to hold on to its roots, but recently, I think you see some, branching away from the mothership, where you've got different styles or maybe different senior instructors, like Ando Sensei in Japan teaches a version of Yoshinkan. He calls it Yoshinkan Ryu, but it still looks very similar to my specific style of Yoshinkan Aikido, which is called Chudo-kan, which is under a gentleman named Kevin Block from up in Windsor, Ontario, Canada. But if you looked at the two systems, it would be very difficult to tell them apart. So, yeah, I would say that it has held on to a lot of its heritage.
But in the way that you practice right now, it would be more of a martial fusion, right? Like,
absolutely. I would literally say that would be a better way to term it.
Like a lot. And you used to compete as well.
I did. And what I think is, I like to call it trying to find the connection. Because it's one thing to do Aikido with an uke, somebody that's, somebody that's taking the brick wall, who's willing to flow and do the movements with you. But it's another thing to create a block and a strike and the ateme and a distraction and be able to take that millisecond of opportunity that you have to connect those pieces of energy together to then move forward to an Aikido movement, which allows you to work through that violent attack to a point of control, which I think is really, that was kind of O-sensei's whole goal, Ueshiba sensei, was this idea of how do I get to a point where I can control violence and control that violent attack? Well, I think there's something to be said for if you know how to strike and you understand percussion well, that's going to really help your Aikido. I think that if you don't know one, it's hard to do the other. If you understand both, it's possible to do both.
Yeah, I find sometimes that just exactly that with some Aikido practice in general, when I see the ukes, the partners, the attackers, that you can clearly see that they don't have any training in other martial arts that are based on strikes or kicks. So even though that they are playing the role of the attacker, the attack itself is not strong enough, it's not serious enough. And I find that sometimes, or most of the time, gets on the way of you being able to practice a real mature technique. Because if you are learning techniques, so you're learning to apply techniques from opponents that actually have a background into attacking in a proper way, your technique is going to be developed in a higher level than just having to deal with somebody that doesn't know how to throw a punch or a kick. So for me, that's kind of been a little bit of the challenge, you know, with just the Aikido training, but at the same time opening up to have other influences and to training in other systems that reinforce those areas as a martial artist that Aikido does not touches, at least in today's Aikido.
Right. I would agree with that. I mean, I think the more skilled your uke is, and the more realistic the attack is, then the more you're going to understand that some skills aren't going to work as well as perhaps what you thought they would. Because the dojo, I mean, if you're going to make mistakes, the dojo is a place to make the mistakes in. You make a mistake on the battlefield, and it oftentimes ends up being the last mistake you ever made. So understanding how to deal with that lethality and deal with that true intent of violence in a constructive way that literally works. I mean, most people, when you attack someone, most people move away, which is often the absolute wrong thing that you should do. You should move in, the irimi, as we would call it, but moving towards attack is counterintuitive. But often in Aikido, we really attack the attack. So when someone throws a punch, I want to attack the punch. And rather than try to control a wrist, I want to control the elbow. That's closer to the body. It gives me better control over their center. And if I control someone's center and I control their head and their balance, then that allows me to get to a point where I can get to katameru, where I literally take that balance and I take control. And a lot of times, you know, martial arts will get criticism when we talk about these sort of mystical things. But you know, we've talked before about, well, let's demystify this. If you drive a car every day, right, and you're going down a highway, and there's a car in the passing lane, and you're driving, and you look, and you just think to yourself, I bet he's going to cut me off.
Right.
And within that moment of that perception, I think he's going to cut me off, you put your foot on the brake, and you slow down just enough. And then all of a sudden, no signal, no intent, but boom, he cuts you off.
Yeah.
That's kind of an example to me of that whole idea of that perception of Zanshin, but in a very practical, understandable way, because as martial artists, if you're a real martial artist, you don't train once a month, you train 5-6 times a week, and it develops into this repetitive skill set that develops this intuitive ability to perceive if someone's going to attack or not. I mean, anybody can attack you. You don't get like this mystical power. Somebody walk up behind you and smack you in the head. That's it. But bottom line is, if you are aware, if your situational awareness, to coin a military term, is at an appropriate level, most of the time you can tell when bad things are getting ready to go down.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's kind of like when you are maybe sitting in a cafe, and you get this sensation, you turn around and there's somebody that is staring at you, you know?
Right.
How do you know? How do you know that somebody is like staring at you? But it's like this intuition, you know, this energy that is reaching at you.
Well, I think we're programmed like that. I think because we're so civilized and we live in such a safe environment, we're almost programmed to really, well, that's going to happen to somebody else. It's not going to happen to me. Or if it should happen, there'll be a police officer there to help me, or there'll be a soldier there to help me, or my martial arts teacher, you know, someone will be there that can handle that situation. And we ignore that little inner voice that tells us, this isn't right, you know. And most of the time, when I teach ladies self-defense, one of the things that I teach the girls and the ladies who take that program is that if your intuitive voice is telling you that something isn't right with this situation, leave. It's your best weapon. Create distance. Distance is time. Time gives you time to react, and that time is what's going to save you.
Yeah, correct. And I completely agree with that, because we all deep down know when something is off. And it's having the ability to recognize that in the moment and take action, and not letting the situation develop and then later on realizing, you know what, I felt something about it and I didn't do anything about it.
Yeah. I mean, it's scary. If someone is truly intent on violence and they are a sociopath, a lot of times they'll give no signals, no clues. they'll be completely calm, and that attack just comes out of nowhere, and you may not see that coming. Where we're lucky is that most of the time, that's such a small percentage of folks. Most of the time, it's your mama wears combat boots kind of thing, where you get into the monkey dance,
right,
and two guys escalate. And if you have any kind of verbal skills, you can de-escalate that through conversation, which really is your first line of defense. Your first line of defense is to see that it's coming. Second line of defense is realize you've got a voice, de-escalate, talk your way out of it. If you can't talk your way out of it, walk your way out of it.
Right.
If you can't walk, run. Of course, I can't run anymore. I got an artificial hip and a bad pelvis, so maybe I talk a little more.
And tell me a little bit about that. How did that happen?
It was I injured my left hip from a military incident, so I've got some pins and screws in that, and I've got an artificial left hip. So it has limited my ability to kick and do some of the things I would have done in my Taekwondo background. But it's also, it's sometimes when God gives you lemons, you got to make lemonade. So it sort of forced me to figure out other ways of doing things. We started the conversation with the different styles of martial art that I've studied. And at this point, I don't even really think about them as a different style. To me, it's all
Aikido. All the same. Yeah,
it's all kickboxing. Yeah. And all of these pathways up the mountain lead to the same point. And eventually, I've done some mountaineering. The higher you get, eventually you end up in snow. And so everything is kind of white and everything kind of looks the same. And you begin to look around and you go, oh, well, that block and elbow strike and knee sweep and throw is Aikido and a Taekwondo and a kickboxing and a sweep and a ground fighting, and it's everything.
Yeah, it's kind of like the Shaolin too, no? Like the original Shaolin Kung Fu, that it was this system that really touched all of these aspects of the martial practice, including to a lot of this like
the spirituality of it.
Yogi, training for achieving a certain level of physicality that is conducive to the proper practice of seated meditation.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the Shaolin, there's a Japanese style. I think it's funny because it's Shorin Ryu.
Right.
They couldn't really pronounce Shaolin, so it comes out as Shorin. But the idea of the Shaolin temples, which date all the way back to the Bodhidharma and really to Buddhism, and Buddhism and Zen Buddhism and those influences on the philosophical nature of the fight, before the fight, and then after the fight. You have soldiers out there that suffer from PTSD. And I think some of the things that martial arts, meditation, misogi, community, training, all of these things that we do out of habit are such a healthy thing to do. I know so many soldiers who, they try to find their comfort at the bottom of a bottle. And I would rather try to find my comfort in a sweaty gi and on a tatami mat in a dojo somewhere.
Yeah,
so just a better way to do it.
Absolutely. How would you say that the martial arts are contributing or helping you with the necessary healing that you yourself feel that you need after the things that you've seen and gone through?
I mean, it never ceases to amaze me at how exquisite a human being can be and the things that they can achieve and develop and the genius of the human spirit. But there's the other side of that, which is the utter evil and horrendous things that we can also do to each other. And my real first experience with that would have been in Bosnia during the Balkans War, where you had people who lived as neighbors, right, for nearly a lifetime. And then over something like philosophical differences in opinion or religious differences of opinion or political differences of opinion. We could talk about this country as far as that goes. But in just a short amount of time, they are doing things to one another. I mean, rape, murder, attacks. It was, Slobodan Milosevic and some of those things that come to my mind, like Srebrenica and the Potokari massacre, and machine gunning people in brake factories, and those sorts of things that happened there are the pogroms that, like, the Jews would have faced in World War II, and how a human being can do that to another human being. If you really look at martial art, you as a warrior, it should teach you that you're not just there to defend a country or this or that, but you're there to defend those who can't defend themselves. You're there to defend honor. You're there to be maybe not a policeman, maybe not a soldier, but martial arts really teaches you this warrior mindset that allows you to deal with these things. And if those sorts of things enter my world or my home, then you're going to have to kill me if you expect to perpetrate that on my family. I won't allow it.
It's like the samurai, the one.
Yeah, one who serves.
The one who serves.
Exactly. Yeah, one who sits below. I was asked one time, "What's my religion?" Yeah. And I told someone I'm a Zen Baptist Buddhist. And they said, "What is that?" I said, "Well, I'm still trying to figure it all out. I mean, I certainly am a Christian and I have my Christian beliefs, but I've also seen enough of the world and had enough of experiences to understand there's a value in Zen studies and in Buddhism and in all of these different things that sort of relate to, O-sensei said their God is God. And I think what he meant by that was there probably is just this one overwhelming source of power that's a universal power, like, you may call it ki, or, the practice of it, qigong. But I think it kind of relates to almost all religions in a way.
I see it the same way. It's this universal single point where everything comes from, and then it's interpreted in different ways.
Right.
And of course, through like culture and organized religion now, they start developing their own stories and methods, which create more and more division. Right. And that's why we find ourselves where we are today in the world. It's my God versus your God, and I'm right and you're wrong, and and all of this. But when you talk to any spiritual person, really a spiritual person, that regardless their religious background, you realize that we are just the same. We are feeling and looking at everything in the same way. Yeah. So with that being said, like, let's dive in a little bit more into this spiritual realm now with you. What do you think it happens to us when we die?
Oh boy!
Because I'm asking you now, not from a point of religion. It's like you can give me a Christian answer to what Christianity tells you. But
that whole Zen Baptist Buddhist thing was actually, I was a expert witness, and it was about a diabetic case, and they were asking me medically and they said, "What's your religion?" And I remember I told the court person, "Well, I'm a Zen Baptist Buddhist." And they said, "No, what's your?" And I said, "Well, that is my religion." Okay. And they said, "Oh, okay." And they stopped, But, clinically, I know what death is. I mean, there's many times inside of a Black Hawk helicopter where I've looked, and you can see that natural spark of life that's in someone's eyes. I can literally see the moment it's gone. And I think anybody, any medic or flight medic or paramedic or PJ or flight surgeon or doc, nurse, anybody that's been in healthcare would probably tell you that, there's a time when you can look and you go, they're gone. They're just not coming back. But what is that soul? What is that energy? What is that spirit? I think it was the Buddhists, it's what is Jesus saves and Buddha recycles. I think maybe there's something to be said for that. This energy that is within the world is ongoing and it's ever present, and maybe it does come back in some other form. I like to think that that's the case. Yeah, I don't know that I have a specific answer. That's a tough question.
It is. It is, and I like asking that question, and I like talking to as many people that can give me an honest response about the question, because I feel that we don't talk enough about these things. All we do is we talk about the answers that have been programmed to us by culture and education and religious organizations, but very few people actually take the time to keep digging into these questions, like what happens to us when we die.
Healthcare people are experts at that, at avoiding that question. You know, on Medivacs, there'd be a medic on the ground, and I'd say, what do we got? And he goes, it's a DRT, like dead right there. You know, so you get this sort of gallows humor, this like ICU humor where people who work with that kind of thing every day have to come up with some way of humanizing it, some way of making it more understandable. And so sometimes you say things as a doc with other medics that may sound a little crass to someone who's not in that practice. But if you see it day after day after day after day for decades, it takes a toll. And so I think a lot of nurses and docs and PAs and nurse practitioners, people who deal with this every day, that question, well, is there life? What comes after death? That's a question I think that often many of us ask and we don't have an answer for. I like to think that when I die, I'm going to see my parents. I think that I do. I believe that there's a heaven. I believe that there's a higher spiritual place that we go to. I think that there is a cosmic energy that unifies all of us as human beings. But sometimes you can see how we treat one another and realize it's both yin and yang within the same person. Yeah. Swords of good and bad, right? Satsunin ken, katsunin to. Swords of life and death.
It seems like the most needed lessons are the most painful ones. You know?
Absolutely. If you're not failing at something, you're not learning. Yeah, my very first black belt examination, Junri, I was sparring with a guy. I did my hyungs and I did the techniques and everything was really good. And I'm just cranking it out. I was 17 and the most important thing in my life at that point was I got to get that black belt, got to get that rank. And so one of the gentlemen who was about 26 and I'm much younger, bigger guy, I fired this sidekick and I broke his ribs. And at the end of the test, Master E's going over everything on the test sheet. He says, well, these were great. This was very good. This was very good. This was very good. Your fitness level's excellent. Your sparring is very aggressive. Everything looks really good on that, except your control. You injured the person that you were sparring with. You fail. And for a 17-year-old kid where that was the pinnacle of, you know, my training at that point, that was a hard pill to swallow. And so a few months goes by and I'm getting ready to go off to the military, you know, in June. And it's like April, May. My dad drives me down to the DC Dojo on Capitol Hill. And Master E is there. And I'm expecting like to have to do this full-on black belt exam. And he goes, come on in my office. And I sit down and he says, what did you learn? I said, well, I learned that I can demonstrate skill without necessarily hurting someone. And he goes, that's the lesson I wanted you to learn. And congratulations, young black belt. And that was it. Yeah, I've never forgotten that.
I haven't heard that that anecdote. That's
it's a true story. Yeah, Master E. He was he always called me Dane Harden. It was never Harden or this, that. Dane Harden. You know, you would ask him a question. Well, Dane Harden, what do you want for yourself?
Okay.
Well, what would you like to do, Dane Harden? I said, well, I want to go in the military. Dane Harden, I think that's a good idea. So. Yeah, he was an interesting guy. Master E was he was my Miyagi, you know? He really was. Yeah. Cool guy.
I feel that through the martial arts, something that anybody like yourself that has gone through that path, and like myself, these very special teachers and figures that we have, that they arrive into our lives at some point, or whether it is that we search for them as well, you know.
When the student's ready, the teacher appears, yeah?
They truly are such a blessings, because they act like stepping stones, the way that I look at it. You know, when I teach my classes in the dojo and I talk to my students about certain things, I say, you know, I think that one of the things that I've come to realize is that the biggest thing that a teacher does for you is that it saves you time. It saves you time because they are able to give you the necessary, whatever it is, for you to finally get something, to understand something, to learn something that by yourself might have taken several lifetimes, and they can do it in a very short period of time. And when they do, that thing that you learn from that teacher is your stepping stone that is allowing you to move into the next layer of your own evolutionary path, you know? So at the end of the day, for me, the strongest thing that a teacher does is that it saves you time. So you don't have to keep repeating the same patterns and the same mistakes, because they're showing you a way for you to do it better somehow, you know?
Or at least they're pointing you in a general azimuth, heading on a compass, you know? They keep you going in the right direction. And I think that's very true. I've had some phenomenally good teachers, and I've had some folks that I've watched teach, and I kind of scratch my head as to what is the intent of what it is they're talking about. But most of the time, you know, if you watch, you can tell when someone really cares about what it is that they're doing, if they're passionate about their teaching. So if they've got that passion, and they've got a skill set that is commensurate with their passion, then that's a balance, and that's a good teacher.
Yeah.
Yeah. My Aikido instructor, Hanshi Block, Kevin Block, he's a big dude, right? Big, powerful guy. His Aikido is beautiful to watch. When he does it, it's smooth and it's flowing, but it's like the vice grip of God. You know, when he grabs you, it's just powerful. But he's not only that, but he has a spiritual nature to him where, you know, I've taken this Kenshu studies course from Hanshi. I think I've got like 24 months or something of Kenshu studies. And it's really just this process of, it's not so much martial skills development as it is martial attitude development. Like, you know, you're doing things like studying ancient Zen philosophies and reading various book assignments and writing book reports on what it was that you just read. And he interviews you and, well, why did you feel this way? What about this? What about that? He calls it koto shitsumon, which means evaluation by sensei. And he has certain answers that he wants to make sure that you get to, and he kind of guides you to them. But like if you haven't done the work or done the study or put in the effort, put in the legwork, you'll never get there. And he just sort of lets you paddle around out there in a circle until you either, one, go back and do the work, or you figure it out on your own. And unfortunately, what you just said, figuring it out on your own could take years. Yeah. So, yeah, it's giving you a compass heading, a way to go.
Yeah. You know, going back with the whole subject of what happens when we die, because there's something that just kind of stayed lingering a little bit in my mind as we continue to talk. Now, tying it up with martial arts culture, in this case, samurai culture and the Japanese, and is the ritual of harakiri and seppuku. The suicide ritual of the samurai, you know, that to some degree, in a cultural manner, we as Japanese martial arts practitioners, we touch lightly, you know, some of that content, even though that doesn't belong to our modern culture or cultural background anymore. And it contradicts Christian Catholic belief as well by taking your own life.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But I've been curious to ask you how do you interpret the seppuku, the harakiri from samurai culture. What is your understanding of it?
I mean, when we're talking about that concept, each society, I think, develops a way of doing things. And Japan, in and of itself, because it was an island nation, you have England, which comes up with chivalry in medieval times and knights and horseback and swordsmanship. And on an island on the other side of the world, you have samurai who were knights, and they rode horses, and they did swords, and they lived on an island. But they were very isolated. And I think because of their hierarchy, one of the more valuable things, or the most valuable and the most important things, were honor and loyalty. Whereas maybe another society, it might be learning and wisdom and spirituality. This idea, especially within the warrior class, and we're not talking about like just a standard, maybe a peasant or someone like that would be in Japan, one of the untouchables. But within that warrior culture, that idea of mieho, of honor, was so sacrosanct and so much the pinnacle that if they did something that questioned either their loyalty or their honor, then they had to prove their bravery. And that's where this whole idea of seppuku or harakiri, which is to cut the center, came from. And this idea that they would open their belly cutting, and if there was just a clean cut and just blood, then they were honorable. And that kaishaku, the second then, who was usually very close to this person, it was like you and I are martial brothers. You might have to cut my head off as my marshal. You wouldn't want to do that. Mm. But if you were ordered to, and I'm cutting, it's just, they valued honor so much in a military society, honor and loyalty. I look at it as, well, what do people who win the Medal of Honor do? They jump up, they run through fire, they pick up wounded comrades, they run them back for treatment, they are getting shot, often they're wounded many times. They may not be in their minds committing suicide, but they're doing acts of bravery and acts of honor that when we look at that, we would go, that's suicidal, that's amazing. Like on Black Hawk Down, some of the guys that crashed the helicopter when the Rangers were in Mogadishu, they fought with tremendous honor and courage and loyalty to one another, and they would die for each other. And I think in a way, harakiri was the samurai's way of showing you, my lord, I'm willing to give you my life. That's all I have to give. It's the most important thing that I have. So how could you show any more loyalty or bravery than to do that? That in my mind is like, Silver Star, Medal of Honor kind of bravery, things that you see our soldiers do all the time. And when they're not on a battlefield, it's often forgotten by a lot of people. But the soldier knows, and the soldier's friends know that kind of bravery does exist. Mm-hmm. And that's an honorable thing, I think. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's...
Does that make sense, G?
Well, I never put those two together in that way, the way that you have described it now, and it makes all the sense. And this is I consider that it's a very difficult subject to speak about too.
Oh gosh, yeah.
That's why I was curious. What is your feeling and perspective on the Japanese ritual?
It's interesting.
Suicide ritual.
My dad actually was in World War II and was in the theater in Okinawa. So he never really talked about it though. But it's that. It really is interesting because even O-sensei talked about, Bushido, and he really felt that Bushido, as it was represented in World War II and presented in the 30s, was kind of an anachronism of what it really should have been. You've got like Inazo Nitobei's book, Bushido, The Soul of Japan.
Yep.
And that's sort of a romanticization of what it really was. But O-sensei felt that Bushido, this way of the warrior, was being strong enough to try to seek a peaceful path, being strong enough to try to work things out, to stop being so confrontational with one another, to try to find some common spiritual path that would lead to peace and lead to strength through unity. And we could use a little of that wisdom today.
Well, we definitely can.
Yeah.
Definitely can. And you've been retired now for how long?
I retired from the Army in 2018. I turned 60.
Okay.
And they said, that's it. You're 60. You're too old, so you can't play Army anymore. You have to retire. So that's what I did.
Do you miss it?
Yeah, I do. But in some ways, it's kind of nice being retired. I kind of get to do what I want to do. But I retired, and I miss the people.
Okay.
I miss a lot of the, because I think I was prior enlisted. I had an awful lot of sergeants and folks that I got really close to. They were like brothers. And officers as well. But, you certainly miss that camaraderie that's within the military. And, through martial arts, you and I, you find other brothers,
For you, the martial arts practice is like the core of your own spiritual path as well?
It has been, yeah. And I really didn't look at it that way when I first started, and I didn't really think it would get that way. But just from the decades of training, you sort of just get to the point where you just want to be a happy, peaceful guy and live your life, live in peace. And that's I think if we talk about my Christian God, Jesus, that's what he wanted of all of us. Be peaceful, but be a warrior. It's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war.
I love that.
So
I love
think
that.
There's some truth to that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, Dane Harden,
Yes.
Colonel Dane Harden. So, where are you training these days, and how anybody that is listening to this beautiful exchange can get a hold of you?
I have a Dane Harden Martial Arts on YouTube is where most of my instruction is. You can go there. I've got almost the entire Taekwondo curriculum all the way through to black belt there, with the hyungs, with the techniques. And it is a blend. There's a lot of kickboxing in what I call Western Masters Martial Arts. And that was a name that I came up with back in 1979 because at that time I sort of opened an independent school. And originally I called it Harden's Martial Arts. And I thought, that's kind of ego. So I'm just going to call it Western Masters because the people that are involved in this are from the West, but we're trying to master something that was from the East.
Yeah. Well, I personally want to thank you for making it all the way down here to the studio and to doing this once more, because every time that I spend time with you, I really just say to myself, I have to talk less and listen more, because I always learn a great deal just from the human being that you are. So I thank you, and I hope others can take advantage of that as well.
Thanks, G. Thank you, my brother. Always a pleasure.
Yes, sir.
Os.
Os.